Welcome to Programmable World, a podcast all about tech ventures, the stories behind them, and the wisdom gleaned from lessons learned. My name is Dan Ilett. I'm an ex-tech journalist, and today I help tech companies to go to market, raise their commercial value, and win more business. I've worked with some of the biggest brands in the world on storytelling, brand, launches, and sales, having launched a few of my own tech companies as well. I love hearing people's stories about how they contributed to their ventures and what they learned on the way. Whether you're an entrepreneur, a business leader, or interested in technology, Programmable World will ignite some sparks and get you thinking about what's possible. Welcome to Programmable World. Today, I'm joined by Carlton Hopper. He's the UK MD of GFT, a digital engineering company that works specifically in financial services. Welcome, Carlton. How are you doing?
I'm very well. Good morning to you. Pleased to be here.
Good. I'm glad you could be here.
Thanks for the introduction. I probably couldn't have said it more succinctly than you did, so I'll not say any more about the introduction of GFT at this point.
Okay. So your background is financial services, technology, and so on. Do you want to just tell us a bit about, where you come from and what you've done and, how you got here?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I'm a 50-something, not a 30-something person. Although I do think 50 is the new 30 these days. So I've been around a wee bit. And if you go way back, which is perhaps too far, I'm a graduate of computer science and accounting, which is a bit of a weird mix in a way, but probably tells you a little bit about what my DNA is in terms of I've always been interested in technology right from the start, but perhaps with a very strong lens of and how does that really make sense in a business sense. So that's how I started my sort of early stage career. So I've spent a lot of time working in services, worked for, 3 of the big systems integrators and consultants, spent some time in a startup bank for those of people who remember the sort of age of telephone banking 20 years ago around the noughties, but also worked in one of the big retail banks as well. So I've been in financial services, client side and services side, and always really at the nexus of where business and technology sort of align. Being also strangely, I think this is quite odd in a way, I've spent a lot of time in big program transformation work in organizations, but I've also spent quite a lot of time on emerging tech and the more fintech side of things, working with blockchain, working with a number of startups when I was working in systems integration to help them scale and connect. So I got one eye on the sort of more entrepreneurial side of the world and another eye on the big heavy duty sort of, if you will, side of the world, which is kind of an interesting mix and probably why I ended up in GFT, who, are an established organization, predominantly working in new tech, but looking to grow. So that's kind of me, if it gives you a sort of picture.
Traditionally, big banks and the big financial services companies haven't been that keen on emerging technologies, but would you argue that's changed?
I think that's changed an enormous amount, certainly in the last 5 to 7 years. In large organizations, in my experience, there's always been some faction in particular in the IT organization that would be curious and interested in what is coming down the line next. But in the last 5 to 7 years, I think with the onslaught, if you will, of people moving to be, frankly, more digital organizations as opposed to IT sits in the back office, it's then become a lot more essential for the business line execs to understand what technology can do to reinvent, power, better, faster, cheaper, whatever their business models. So you've kind of seen the technology narrative in organizations come from the back office of, pens in the shirt pocket to being right at the boardroom. And I think that's a major shift, certainly in the last 5 to 7 years in my experience. And then, of course, that's aligned with the fact that a number of technologies have somewhat hardened and become a bit more mainstream as opposed to a bit more experimental. So large organizations' muscle to understand and master future technologies is no longer an R&D initiative. It's something that's essential. I think that's also linked to this. There's a little bit of a disruption, I think, going on in the services world. Certainly, you go back 5, 10 years ago, and I've worked on the services side of the world, the clients and organizations very willing and wanting to outsource, give the problem to organizations to fix. I don't think that's really the way that things will go in the future. If I was running a company in financial services, I want to be in control of my thought processes and my my design of my business, which is that by definition very linked to the design of the technology. So I want my people to understand it, as opposed to just be procuring other people to do it for me.
A lot of global companies have invested heavily in the location strategy in order to take advantage of, cheaper labor in other countries and so on. Do you think that's going to shift and people are starting to bring more things back either onshore or nearshore?
We're a global village now, and there's technology capability all over the world. In GFT, we're a global organization. We have people in Asia, we have people in South America, we have people in North America, we have people in Eastern Europe, and we leverage those skills less so about sort of following the sun, but there are different skill domains, and there are also different price points as well that you can leverage. The notion of how do we do things cheaper because we're doing it in another location has perhaps been put in the spotlight during COVID, where people wanted to have things a little bit closer to home because you can work remotely, but you do want to be able to go and visit and go and see people as well. So you've got that factor, which I think is driving some sense of bringing things a little bit more closer to home or in-house. But also, some of the markets globally are dealing with issues. There's very significant turnover, certainly in the market in India, which I think is very challenging for organizations that use suppliers there or indeed have their own captive organizations. So I think it's a number of factors that are perhaps drawing. The biggest one for me, though, is you need to be in control of your own design, if you will. And therefore you need to, have architects, and you need to have understanding and skills and understanding of what the technology does and does not do within your own firewall, within your own organization to a greater extent than I think you probably needed 5-10 years ago.
Yeah. So in terms of the disruption that's going on then, in this market, what do you see it being? Is it to do with the fact that traditional engineering or outsourcing companies, there's a lot of complaints about quality, and then with the sort of business integrators, they don't really have necessarily the depth of understanding of the technologies themselves. They would give it to someone else to do, don't they?
I have a huge respect for the organizations that are niche and the organizations that are large and the advisory and strategy firms and, systems integrators. I've worked in them, huge respect. However, I think if you just put a client lens on this, because of what I've said, clients want different things. The first thing, they need people who really understand the technology at a very deep level. It's always been the case that, the business should inform IT and IT should inform the business. But if you think about becoming a more digitally native organization, what you can do with technology and what you could do with technology and how safe and secure it is, for your business and your consumers, is no longer a back office consideration. It actually may inform your business models. If you look at some of the more neobanks, they are ground up, driven very much around engineering and technology. It's informing what you can do and how you can interact with your consumers. And therefore, if you're an informed client wanting to do something, you want to work with organizations that have a really, really deep expertise. That's quite hard to get, and it's hard to maintain the quality level. I think in particular, if you're a large organization, I think if you're a smaller organization, you can specialize in sector, you can specialize in particular domains, and clients, I think, are valuing that expertise a lot more than perhaps they were. That linked to the fact that they are wanting to be more informed and in control themselves. They're more likely to work with best of breed providers, in my view, and work themselves how to package it together, then ask somebody to give them the answer and run it for them.
So you mentioned neobanks there. That's an interesting topic right now. And some people don't necessarily believe in the power of the neobank per se. A lot of effort's gone into building neobanks and some banks have put enormous effort into getting new brands out the door and haven't made the business case for it. I know that you look and help companies to sort of, and banks in particular, to build those kinds of things, but have they really proven the case for it?
I think you'd have to ask my teenage kids about that first and foremost, because what I mean by that is, I find it really interesting. I mean, I've got a 20-year-old and an 18-year-old, and I've enjoyed, getting to know their pals and friends over the last couple of years as they're all, leaving school, going to university, and some situations going to jobs. Getting your Starling or your Monzo card is like getting your driving test for them. They don't get to, the age that they're allowed to have a bank account and going to go, all due respect, who you are, I've got my, NatWest or my Barclays or, or whoever. It's become a thing, right? In the same way as whatever social media platform or flavor they enjoy using, which of course they all have different views. So in a way, you got to ask my kids that a little bit more than you can ask me. I mean, I'm a customer of a neobank. I've also been a customer with the same bank that I joined when I took my student account of God knows how many years ago. And in that regard, as the generations move forward, I think the model is extremely powerful because they've, a lot of the new organizations that have got into the market with new propositions, maybe a little bit easier to engage with, faster, sparkier, perhaps with new tools and capabilities that people, want to be able to have on their phone, frankly, that will really help. Having said that, I'd also kind of say, you also need to consider my, 85-year-old father who's as dexterous with an iPad as probably I was about 5 years ago. So that early stage career professional is more interested, I think, in the proposition of some of the neobanks, and that's going to therefore flow through over the next 10 years. But also, we're all pretty au fait with smartphones now. For sure, there's a segment of demographics and countries that want to go into a branch. The old relationship with an organization that they have had for many years is very important to them. And I think that's still very, very important. But I think the business case is starting to be proven. Starling didn't exist 5 years ago. They've got nearly 3 million customers now.
Yeah, I mean, the experience is phenomenal with Starling. I love it. It's a brilliant bank. What they've done in terms of just getting the account itself, what is it? It's like less than 5 minutes to sign up. And then you hear back from them within, I think, it's 2 hours or something like that.
I was going to say, so the big organizations, they are also building their own brands, right? They're desperately trying to modernize their technology to be able to be very agile, to be able to get offers and features out quickly.
Is this where you think, because Carlton's just put a report saying, large companies and in financial services, companies are going to be spending more on IT. The spend is going up. Is this what's happening? Are they moving architecture so they can accommodate this kind of initiative? Neobanks is one of them, right? But there's other things as well that they're trying to get off the ground.
Yeah, well, if you're trading digitally, you've got to be right at the front and ahead of how you're managing your organization securely. Cybersecurity is another, not a back office, pen in the pocket sort of engineering thing. It's a core part of the way that you run and run your business securely. I think also, if you think about perhaps we're obviously suffering some economic challenges. We're perhaps coping really well, I would say, post-COVID and with what is going on globally, probably a little bit better than maybe we would have imagined maybe a year ago. But it's still pretty tough trading out there. You do two things in that environment, don't you, if you're a business? Well, you can do three things. Yeah, you cost reduce and you go into a bunker. You keep the steady ship, or you innovate your way through the storm. And I think a lot of organizations rightly are thinking, well, we have to innovate our way through tough trading times. So certainly maybe some of the more discretionary projects that are a little bit nice to have, business case may have made sense in a more economic upturn. I've seen for some of my clients, them reducing their spend. But I've, seen a lot of more of our clients wanting to maintain or accelerate their move to modernize their technology to frankly be better, faster, cheaper, and to be able to deal with organizations that are digitally native and can, wake up on a Monday morning, decide that they need to have a new feature. And by the end of the week, if they want, it can be live. If you're an existing organization, it takes you 6 months, you can't compete in that environment.
The cloud providers would have you believe that they're the answer to all of those problems. Modernized architecture will give you the ability to do those things. Do you agree with that sentiment?
Well, I think the notion of building technology that, runs in a cloud native way is an enormously powerful and great enabler. But if you look at work where we have been involved in helping either completely new brands or existing brands wanting to build a parallel new brand on cloud technology, that is but one part of the problem. You have to build the application. You have to integrate it into the ecosystem of banking, whether that be your payments infrastructure. You have to think about the operating model in your business, which is a non-technology conversation and narrative. So for sure, the notion of cloud computing is a big enabler, but there's an awful lot more work that goes around it. It's a bit like blockchain. I did a bit of work early stage in blockchain in a previous role, which was a really great privilege to be right at the beginning of 5-6 years ago, how that might be used in an enterprise context. In a typical project that we were working in, where blockchain was in some way, shape, or form part of the solution, the actual blockchain component was sometimes less than 10% of the workload. The rest of it is around security, integration, operating model. So yes, they may be the catalyst, but there are lots of other bits of work that need to be done to be able to successfully implement some outcome.
One of the trends that's occurring in financial services is obviously the increase in the number of platforms that are coming onto the market. And equally, the rapid adoption of some of those platforms, or at least, certainly the testing of them and so on. Some of these platforms are coming from companies that aren't the usual suspects. They're not from the cloud providers necessarily. They're from completely independent firms, but they're coming at such a rate of knots that, there's two things going on, I suppose. One is, as you've said, the banks, the insurance companies know they need to adopt and they know they need to do something with them. But do you think the system integration market is actually keeping pace with the emerging technologies that are coming out? Can you see them kind of getting behind all the platforms fast enough to keep pace with what the banks and the insurance firms are after?
It's pretty hard, really, isn't it? Because it's a bit of a free market, and it depends on I guess let's just define platform in a way. You build an application that's cloud native to do something, you package it up together to provide a solution that, somebody can consume in an easy way. There are a large number of organizations that, are either looking to modernize their existing offering to be a modern cloud native platform from where they currently are in terms of on-prem, et cetera. Or there are people who've just said, let's build it from scratch. And it's quite hard, I think, for organizations to place a bet because
can you just explain what cloud native is for anyone who wouldn't understand what that is?
If you program and build an application, if you will, in the heritage world on mainframe, it is architected in a certain way to run on infrastructure in a certain way. Building from scratch in a cloud native way, it is a completely different mindset in terms of how you code it, how software is developed and tested and released in terms of speed and agility. And you can run an existing application in the cloud on a different box somewhere else. Whereas if you code it ground up in a very agile way, it affords all sorts of benefits in terms of your ability to integrate faster and your ability to be able to change that code at speed and securely to be able to be far more agile. My point was, if you're a consultant or you're an integrator, how do you keep your eyes on, what's emerging and going to win versus what's not? It's quite hard to do that. And also, the bigger the organization you are, rightly and understandably from a business point of view, you want to be agnostic to those solutions. So you want to say, we can implement this for you, we can implement that for you. But back to my expertise point is, you've got to sort of place your bets, really, I think, if you're in the services market, about which are the best to breed. And, a smaller organization or a medium organization, we're a medium-sized organization, can and needs to sort of, prioritize and pick the ones and go quite long on them. I think the larger the organization you are, you sort of understandably want to be able to sort of do anything. And that's quite hard to keep the level of expertise. And then, of course, the other thing is, if you look on the supply side, if you're a fintech, right, and you're coming up with a new idea for a new solution, we do work with a number of them. We do a lot of work with Thought Machine, which is an organization that didn't exist really, 5 years ago. There's got to be fundamentally some new idea about how you are providing that service in terms of it's innovative, it's cheaper, it affords also other benefits. But there's also a lot of business marketing required to launch a new business. I'm desperately trying not to show my age and go into a Betamax and VHS analogy, but, it's not necessarily about the best tech is what I'm saying, as well. It's also about how you package that, how you take it to market, how you launch it in what market, how you capture the imagination of what is required. There's as much business in launching technology successfully as there is technology expertise, and the two have got to come hand to hand. I think it's increasingly hard for people providing advice and services to maintain a sort of agnostic posture. Because if you go back to my point with clients saying, how do I do this? They're going to go, what do you think is going to work? And do you have the expertise to do this? And if in a year's time, you kind of go around and say, well, actually, we think this is better and we shouldn't have done this. Not great on your credibility for your client service. So it's a real challenge. It's a real challenge.
If you look at the IT stack, so the IT stack being all of the stuff that's been bought and implemented before over, for a big organization over decades sometimes, it's a bit of a ball of elastic bands. And I guess there's 2 points about this that I think are, they're becoming, or they've been clear for ages. But there's one problem that is not addressed as much as it perhaps should be, and that is the tenure of the leader or the person who makes the decisions on, technology purchase and so on. Or because I'm sure you've seen this. You see a leader who they've got the option to kick something down the line and keep it there because it's a difficult decision to make. I mean, moving something big and difficult and ugly, switching something off that's a core application, that's a massive decision to make. And that's kind of why you've got the legacy problem, right? It's such a big risk switching that stuff off or moving over to something else that it's easier to sort of say, well, I'll be here 5 years. That could still be here in 5 years. I don't need to make that decision myself. I'll leave it to someone else. Do you think tenure is a bit of a problem for IT, and not just IT, but business decision making, actually?
I mean, that's a really interesting question. Yes, is the short answer, but I think it's going to be really interesting to see how that develops. If you're an organization with a significant amount of complexity and you want to embark on modernizing your core platforms for onboarding and processing new products, you either have to build something from scratch, but many people are looking to do that under a separate brand and then see how that goes and then perhaps cannibalize. That's a very good strategy, which I guess is sort of, build it outside the firewall of the organization. Or you embark on a program to modernize and migrate, which by definition is non-trivial, particularly if you've got a data migration. I've had the privilege, in quotes, of having been involved in some really big migrations in my career within banking, and they're scary things, right? And by the way, they cost a lot of money, and by the way, they don't take a year; they take multiple years. And by the way, a lot of people, certainly in the UK market, if you talk about migration, will immediately start talking to you about some of the issues that, a number of organizations have faced in recent history, not least TSB, where, issues have resulted in, major PR issues to the bank's brand. And also, frankly, it costs people's reputations and jobs at very, very senior levels. So for sure, I personally have been involved in a number of conversations, obviously not going to name any of the clients, where they're talking about modernizing, where one of the considerations is what their posture is for taking that risk on personally, in their executive positions. So, for that regard, the answer's got to be yes. What I'd observe is I'm increasingly I was chatting to my wife about this last night, actually, because I was talking to a client. It was somebody I knew many, many years ago. And I was kind of just commenting back that, I've ended up where I've had and they've ended up there, which is great because experience does matter. But there's also, my team are dealing with people who are making decisions who are 20 years younger and, are at the right peak of the high-flying stage of their sort of mid-career, if you will, who don't think about the legacy because they've perhaps been born in a world where it's not a bigger feature. And the more senior they get, the more they'll become more comfortable making those decisions. So I think for sure, has somebody made a decision somewhere in the last week to not do something because it's too risky? Absolutely, for sure. But then, I also have a real hope that most seasoned, good business executives will take the right decision for their organizations, fundamentally, the really good ones. And part of being an executive, let's be honest, is you've got to take personal risk. So yes, it is an issue. Is it stopping innovation? I'd like to think not, if I'm honest, because I think, as I say, most people who are professional, the reason why they're paid and the reason why they do the job is to make those hard decisions and take the personal risk. But it certainly is back to, you'll certainly, it was interesting when I was, involved in blockchain a number of years ago. I used to comment to, some of the team that I used to work with, because this was a hugely emerging technology, 5 years ago. Some would argue it still is, right? And it's still maturing. You would be in a meeting with the chief executive of the company and the lead developer in the same meeting. And the reason why you would be in that meeting is there would be some interest in wanting to explore some proof of concept or there's some business model where there's a real, genuine, germane interest from the chief executive about how this could really affect my business or maybe a parallel business or maybe my industry, but wanting to have the 20-something in the room who was in the code in the same meeting. If you think about it, that's bizarre. When I started, bizarre in a good way. When I started my career, it was very, the developers never go to the meetings with the chief executive. So I think that's a good thing because, chief executives in particular, need to be really informed about the technology. And the CIO the CTO has a much stronger voice in the board. And in that regard, making those risk decisions is really then becomes a function of one, your executive, how you're executing your role and taking risks, but also understanding the technology, which brings you right back to you really need to have people in your organization, or you need to have partners who really know their onions and can really explain, what the risks and opportunities are. Long answer, but I think it would be wrong to say, there's a load of people out there ducking the decision, because clearly, we wouldn't be doing the work we're doing, and our partners and other competitors wouldn't be as busy. But I think it's a tougher business to be in, because you need to understand the implications of the decisions you're making, and you need to understand that they can be dramatically impactful on your business in terms of what can go wrong, as well as what can go right.
Stakes keep getting higher and higher, don't they? Really?
But why is that different? Yeah, why is that different? I mean, job one in any good seasoned CEO is know your market, know your business. And if your business is powered by technology in a significant way, therefore you know the IT, whether that's you personally or whether it's the skill and competence of the team that you have around you.
Right. So what's next for you this year? What's the plan GFT-wise? What have you got your eyes on?
Well, we're financial services orientated. Our heritage started very firmly in capital markets. Our business has broadened. We are doing more work in general insurance, asset management, and in particular in retail banking. So job one for me is to expand and diversify into those 4 sectors in a much more meaningful way. We've got some really, really interesting projects, that people will hear about when they go live, and some people will hear about, when we can announce what we're doing. It's really about growing our business. We're looking to expand. We opened our office in Manchester about a year ago. We're looking to, be a much more national organization, not just central gravity in London. We're not looking to have 200 clients. We're looking to have the right sort of 20, 40 clients. So in that regard, a lot of people don't know who GFT are. I think there's a little bit more about sort of talking about the work that we're doing in a more public forum and talking about our success story. So a little bit of just continuing to expand our business, but perhaps get people to know who we are a little bit so that we can sort of do more business and help people in better ways.
Carlton Hopper, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Programmable World podcast. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To find out more about the podcast, our guests and the topics we cover, head over to programmable.world to subscribe to our newsletter, or have a look at our company at tollejo.com. That's TOLLEJO.com. Have a good day.